This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. Neither love nor tear makes one blind. Indifference makes one blind. It's If Beale Street Could Talk, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We're in the middle of our Twilight summer series, but that's not what we're doing today. We're talking about a 2018 film directed by Barry Jenkins, written and directed, adapted from the film by James Baldwin. It's If Beale Street Could Talk. Katie, I believe we have all of our segments except for Lost in Adaptation.
I believe that's correct.
Cool. So we're going to just jump right into it with our first segment, Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
So what I have gathered from us watching the film is that the book and the movie are very similar.
Yes.
So we'll just do one Let Me Sum Up if you haven't seen it. So spoilers abound if you have not watched If Beale Street Could Talk. You can. If you missed our preview episode, you can pause right now. You can go watch it on Hulu if you have it. It's included in your Hulu subscription. But if not, that's fine. You can also rent it at a bunch of different places. But here's a little brief, synopsis in case you didn't get a chance to watch it. The story takes place in the
It's like 70s, yeah.
70s, I believe. Yeah, in the 70s in Harlem in New York. We have two main characters, Fonnie and Tish, and they're young lovers. So the narrative in the movie, and we're going to get into how it's presented in the book versus the movie, if it's different, if it's the same. But we jump around a lot timeline-wise. But the overall story is that Tish and Fonnie have been best friends since they were little kids. They are now 19 and 22, respectively. So they are adults, and they start to fall in love. And this story that we are audience to in their life is the moment where Fonnie is accused of... shortly after they get together and find an apartment together and are like starting their lives together, Fonnie is accused of raping a woman across town, and then is caught and arrested by a cop who he had an encounter with earlier in the film at a grocery store, and this cop does not seem to like him. But he's arrested after this woman so he's arrested as he's seen by this cop, and then the woman who was the victim identifies him in a police lineup as the attacker, and now he's going to be on trial for this thing, which he did not do. And it's briefly explained in the movie that it was literally physically impossible for him to be like again on the other side of New York City, almost from where he was. In the time frame where he was supposed to be, because he was with Tish and his friend, who I cannot remember the name of, Daniel. So he was with them when this was supposed to have happened, so he couldn't have gotten to the other place in time. So he's wrongly imprisoned, and then the story is the attempt by his family to clear his name, basically, to build a defense for him, to get him out of jail, because we find out very shortly into him being behind bars that Tish is expecting, and they're going to be having a child together. So Tish and her family are working their hardest to find corroborating evidence to vindicate him, and basically win the suit so that he can win the case so that he can be released, and they can begin their lives together. Spoilers. That does not happen, and he ends up taking a plea deal and has to spend much of his child's young life in prison. We actually don't find out how long. We may talk about that later, how long the plea deal is for. That's not presented in the movie. The child is, I don't know, 3 or 4 when they.
I would say a little older.
Maybe
than
a little
that
older
at the
than that
end,
when we see him at the end, and we don't know how close Fonny is to getting out at that point. So he's been in for at least 5 years or so, and we don't know how much longer he has on his sentence left. And it's a heartbreaking tale of racial injustice in the justice system, among other things. Is that mostly?
That's mostly
it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's lots of other stuff. We're going to get into all the details and that sort of stuff as we get to it, but that's kind of the overarching plot of the story, and it's the same in the book. So there you go. We do have Guess Who this week.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay?
All right, we have 4 this week. So fire up your brain.
It's not functioning at 100% right now. I'm going to try.
She started to put on a little weight. Her hair is turning gray, but only way down at the nape of her neck and in the very center of her hair. So she's gray, visibly, only if she bows her head or turns her back, and God knows she doesn't often do either.
Well, I would assume that, I mean, she sounds like a very self-possessed woman, older, or getting older. I would assume that, and I don't remember all the names of the secondary characters very well, but I would say that is Tish's mom.
Yes, that is Tish's mom. Her name is Sharon.
Sharon. I don't know if they kept that detail of the gray hair in the film.
It didn't seem
but
like it.
I don't know if we ever saw the
it,
back of her head very much either. So
she was wearing gray slacks and an old blouse, and her hair was untidy on her head, and she wore no makeup.
I have gray slacks and an old blouse, no makeup. Okay, no, I know who that is. That's Victoria. Maybe. I would say that's Victoria.
No.
No? Mm-mm. That's okay, then I have no idea. Victoria is the victim who picked Fonny out of the lineup. Mm-hmm. She's the only one I can think of that wears like an old blouse and that doesn't have makeup. I don't know who else that would have. Who is it? Who?
That's Ernestine, Tish's sister.
Oh, okay. She wears very colorful pants in the movie, so that didn't track for me at all. Because she has like almost plaid, like, I don't know, at least in most of the scenes that we see her, she's wearing very brightly colored pants and is wearing makeup, I feel like, but maybe not. Yeah. It's hard to tell. But
there's a lot of fun like period costume in this movie.
Yeah, the costumes are great. They had a lot of fun clearly doing the 70s. Tish's dad at one point when they're running their hustles, he's got like the fedora tipped and he's got like the big coat and he looks so cool. He looks way too cool.
He had no part in his hair now. It was heavy all over his head. He was wearing an old black and red lumber jacket and old gray corduroy pants. His heavy shoes were scuffed, and he smelled of fatigue.
Well, the lumber jacket, I don't even know what a lumber jacket is, but I mean, Fonny works with wood in the film. He's in the woodworking, and the rest of that description could vaguely fit that. It could also potentially be, because it seems like a laborer's outfit, and I don't know exactly what Tish's dad does, but he does some sort of something. He seems very blue-collar job of some sort. So those would be my two, because that doesn't fit Fonny's dad. His dad is more like dapper. He's got kind of I don't know, he has like more dapper, stylish clothes. So I'm going to say that that's Fonny.
It is Fonny.
Okay. Do you know what a lumberjacket is?
I do not.
Okay, cool. I'm just making sure I wasn't the only one who didn't know what a lumberjacket was. I mean,
I would assume it maybe looks something like the what came to my mind right away was like a Carhartt jacket, like that type of like heavier.
That's kind of what I thought too. Yeah. Okay. So that I guess he does wear something, because there is like, this is what I was thinking of, and that is probably what like the ones where it's like plaid. And some of them have like leather on the outside. Other ones are just like plaid. You know, like a lumberjack jacket.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the lumber jacket. I guess that makes sense.
They just took out one of the jacks when they named it.
Yeah.
We'll just smush those together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is still a very fashionable piece of clothing.
Yes.
So.
And Tish's dad, by the way, works on the docks. So
Okay.
you were right, he is like a blue-collar worker.
Yeah.
All right, last one. She was dressed in something which looked very stylish until you looked at it. It was brown, it was shiny, it made one think of satin. And she was wearing a kind of scoop hat, an upside-down coal shuttle, which hardened her hard brow. She was wearing heels, she was gaining weight. She was fighting it, not successfully.
Well, then that's definitely... yeah, she's not wearing brown in the movie. She's only in one scene, but I would say that's Fonny's mom.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, she in the movie she's wearing like a white, I don't know, but she is dressed much more. There's a very much a clash in sort of personality, not even only personality, but just like Tish's family presents much more working class than Fonny's family does, even though Fonny's family isn't like wealthy.
Yeah, Fonny's family is also working class,
Yeah.
but that is like one of the characteristics of his mom and his sisters in the book is that they're like way more concerned with like appearances
And it comes across in the movie too.
Yeah,
very
definitely.
Well, so, yeah. All right, that's it for Guess Who. We're gonna get into what's that in the book.
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
First one, and it's not a major aspect of the... Well, it is a major aspect of the film. That's not true. Fonny is really into woodworking in the film, but specifically like sculpting with wood and like creating like art with wood, as opposed to like he's not like making cabinets or he's not like really into like making super fancy. He does talk about that, like he likes working with wood in general, but the thing he seems most passionate about in the movie is more of like sculpture with wood, like art installations with wood and stone, I believe he says. Is that a character aspect of Fonny in the book?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So directly translated, he and like sculptures and everything.
Yeah,
like...
he makes sculptures out of like scrap wood.
Interesting. It's a very specific... I don't know. It was very fascinating because at first, like when we were introduced to him in the movie, he's going to like a vocational school. Mm-hmm. And he quits pretty quickly. But he's like learning to make like normal,
like
furniture and stuff. But then he ends up sort of realizing that his passion lies in a much more abstract artistic expression. And it's really, I don't know. It's something about it was just a very unique character quirk that, not character quirk, but like, I don't know if I've ever seen a character in anything who was like into sculpting wood. It was such a very unique, not only like to have an artistic, obviously having like a character having an artistic pursuit isn't like strange or unique, but like specifically sculpting, it's not like he's a painter or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sculpting wood is so distinct.
Yeah, it is kind of a distinct, unique like type of art to have him pursue. Like, I mean, you're right. The more common thing would be like, oh, he's a painter, or he's a musician, he's a writer, or
even just is a woodworker, but like makes like really fancy like furniture or something. It's one of those things. It's one of those character traits that flies in the face of his family and his upbringing. Yeah, and that sort of oppositional. That friction between them is between his mom, particularly his mom and his sisters, is that you can imagine from the one scene we see them in the movie that they don't much approve of him making abstract wood sculptures. Like, doesn't seem like the kind of thing that they're like would be very supportive of. So,
and it's unique and kind of flies in the face of like the way that black men and black boys are often written, and they're not often afforded the chance to be like sensitive artist types.
Yes. Or
in
if
real life and in media.
Yeah, or if they are, it is generally, a like a jazz musician or something. Like that's sort of the stereotypical. Yes, for sure, is the way it would often be presented in movies and that sort of thing. But yeah, I just thought it was really sort of unique. And the one sculpture he gives Fonny's mom was really cool, or Tish's mom was really cool at the like beginning of the movie. But
Yeah, the one where it's kind of like a swoopy.
Yeah.
We don't see it very close up.
Yeah,
but...
well, to me, it almost looked like from far away and from an angle, it kind of looked, and then maybe this is intentional, but to me, it almost looked like a baby wrapped in swaddling. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was an intentional, like, sort of, allusion to future events. He's giving her this thing or whatever. But that's kind of what it looked like to me from the side view where we see it early in the film. Okay, so speaking of Fonny's family, in particular his mom, in the film his mom's a nightmare person. Just the worst. Her and her sisters, or her daughters. When they show up after Tish realizes she's pregnant, she tells Fonny, and then she tells her parents, and then they call over Fonny's family to have her tell them. And this is controversial because they're not married, because they weren't able to get married before Fonny went to jail, among other reasons. Fonny's mom reacts very poorly to this news, loses her mind. But even before that, you very quickly realize that she's, again, just from her initial, her outfit, her costume in the film, but her character's outfit and that sort of thing, and the way she carries herself, that she's a very judgmental person, and she jumps into sort of like she's talking trash about how Fonny didn't study enough when he was a kid and this sort of thing, and you immediately dislike her in the film. Is her character, and she's also very religious. It's like her main character trait is that she's incredibly religious, and that's what causes the big blow up between them. Is that she curses Tish and Fonny's child because they had this baby out of wedlock, and it's sinful and lustful and blah blah blah, all these things. And is she the same overly judgmental, overly religious zealot in the book?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. The movie nails her and the two sisters.
Yeah.
They're awful.
Yes.
Just, like, immediately walk in, like, looking down their noses, and just the absolute worst. Would never want to interact with this type of person.
No, absolutely not. And it does start. It immediately sort of kicks off because I was not expecting religion to be such a major theme in this film, and from what it sounds like, also it is also in the book, a big component of it, and it does immediately sort of kick off this the theme of that Baldwin very clearly is very judgmental. Not judgmental is not the right word. Critical of religion, and the effect that it has on people, or can have on people, and in particular that's expressed through, and I read that quote during the prequel, and it actually applies here really well, and he had and I gotta try to remember it now, but it was something along the lines of I don't have room for God except for as far, if God makes you bigger, more loving, and more free, I think, or something like that. That's the only use I have for God, is so far as it makes you bigger, freer, and more loving. Apart from that, if God can't do that, get rid of him, or something like. I'm butchering it horribly, but it was it was very eloquently put, and I just brutalized it. But it was something along those lines, and I feel like that's really personified in Fonny's mom's character, because her religion pushes her to an extreme of absolutely, the opposite of all those things. She is it does the opposite of set her free. She constantly judges everything in her life in relation to her religion and her religious beliefs, and she judges everybody else in relation to that, and that leads to her being incredibly callous and just unloving of other people, who don't meet her standards, of her essentially impossible standards to some extent, of what she sees as what her faith calls for. And it's that theme continues throughout the movie, but that first scene is very powerful, and it's a crazy scene, and we're going to talk about it a little more, but including this particular line, which is my next question, which I want to ask. So things blow up in this scene after it's Fonny's mom starts yelling at Tish, and again, like, cursing her and cursing the baby, and everybody gets very upset. And then Fonny's dad hits Fonny's mom and knocks her down to the floor. And everybody's like freaking out, obviously. It's a big scene. And it's a horrifying scene in general because she's being awful. Obviously, hitting her isn't the right call. Like, and that you understand it to some extent because she's being awful, but also it's like, no. But there is this line, I couldn't help but, this line got to me, is that one of the daughters says something about her heart problems. Or something like that.
She has heart issues.
She has heart issues, and maybe might even say something along the lines of like you stopped her heart or something like that. And he says, "I think you'll find it's still pumping, but I wouldn't call it no heart." And then like storms out. It's like, good Lord, you guys should probably get divorced. This is not a healthy relationship, at all. Is that line in the book?
Yes, it is.
Good Lord, does that whole scene play out like that in the book?
Yes.
Wow, that's very early in the movie. It's in like the first 20 minutes probably. Maybe first 30 minutes for sure. And it's a jaw-dropping scene. There's just so much going on, and there's like so many.
Yeah, there's so much going on.
There's many layers to it.
So many levels, and it's just the speed with which they like snap back and forth at each other is incredible, but it still feels real.
Yeah.
And like sometimes in scenes like that, it can go too fast and it feels like actors.
Yeah, for sure.
But that was not the case here.
No, I never felt that way. This movie is, and I mean, we'll get to it. I'm sure you'll get to it in your final verdict. But I oftentimes in the beginning, I'll kind of do like a little short review, and I was blown away. I thought this movie was brilliant, like absolutely just astonishing. And we'll talk about it more. But everything about it was just super, super good. And the craftsmanship of this particular scene, because it's very hard to do. I can imagine it would be very hard to do and to get right to where the sympathies are like, as an audience member, your sympathies are pretty much specifically with Tish and her family, but also fluctuate sometimes to Fonny's dad. Like Fonny's dad's such a interesting character and like a complicated character because he's not a great person, but also is he's just a nuanced I mean, they're all fairly layered people. The next part, I should have included this with that question, is that it's one of those moments that also in that same scene that was really it's one of those things where it's like you don't know these characters enough to know. I mean I did, to know whose side I was on, but also we had just met them and it was so heated so quickly. But as they're leaving, the two Fonny's sisters are like bickering with Tish's sister and stuff, and Tish's sister just like lays the verbal smackdown on them as they leave, and it's great. And I just want to know if that was in the book.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Now Tish's sister. Sometimes they call her Ernestine and sometimes they call her Sis. Yeah. In the book. I can't remember that they ever actually called her Sis in the movie.
They may.
They might have.
They may have.
But anyway,
she kind of disappears after the first half, I feel like.
Yeah, she's not in the second half of the movie very much. No. And which is kind of similar for the book. Yeah. But she's not as pivotal. She's in a couple scenes, but she was like my favorite character.
Oh, she's great early in this
story. Yeah. She does not give a fuck.
Yeah, you can tell that very quickly in the movie. Yeah. That scene in particular, and
it was like this big sister energy.
Yeah.
And I'm always here for that because I'm a big sister.
Yeah. I thought it was fantastic. So in the movie, as I mentioned during Let Me Sum Up, is that it is not in a linear structure. We follow the story as it sort of jumps around. It's basically kind of, from what I could tell, running in two separate lines, and we kind of jump back and forth a little bit between like previous, like back in time when they like were first getting together and finding an apartment, and the lead up to when Fonny was accused, and then the current time where he's in jail and she finds out she's pregnant and tells them, and then they're working on the case for him, and we kind of jump back and forth between those two timelines roughly. I'm sure there's some other, but so it's not linear in that regard. Is the structure in the book similar to the movie?
Yes, it is. So you're right. The movie is basically following like two kind of timelines.
That's kind of what it seems like.
We have like the present where he's in jail and she's pregnant, and then we have like this past storyline that kind of slowly reveals the events that led up to
him being in jail.
Being in jail. The book, I would say, is even a bit more non-linear than the movie is. Some of the events of the like past storyline are told more out of order than they are in the movie, as well as the book also occasionally dips like even further into the past to when they're kids.
The movie has like one scene.
The movie has like one brief scene where they're like splashing in the bathtub together.
It goes to it a couple times.
But there's like a couple specific like interactions when they're kids in the book.
Interesting. Yeah, and I don't know for sure. It's kind of hard to tell at times. I don't know how often. I don't know if the pre like the past storyline follows like every time we go back, if it follows in straight narrative order or if it jumps around a little bit as well. I think it jumps around a little bit as well. A little bit. Because there's moments where we see stuff like I feel like the interaction with the cop happens before or after the moment where they find the apartment, but I can't remember. But I felt like in my head as I was watching it felt like that wasn't a perfectly linear, but just two linear narratives. It felt like both of them had some scenes out of order, but it's possible they didn't. I've only seen it once.
Yeah.
So, but that clearly was taken from the book. Just maybe the book did even more of that than the movie. Okay. Does Tish get a job at the perfume counter at the local whatever store, Sears, Roebuck, or whatever?
Yeah, it's like the department store.
Yeah, the local department store. Does she get that job?
Yes.
Okay, and then my second question follow-up, there's this scene in the movie where she's talking about when customers come in and who the kind of customers she sees when she's working, because she talks about how she was hired in this department store that's pretty much all white people. She's like the only person of color working in the store. And like it was like she says, I'm sure the store thought it was very progressive to have a black girl working the counter or something like that. And so she's kind of like a token, in this store. And she talks about how her interactions with different customers, and she goes, very rarely do black men come in, again, because it's like a very fancy, and they're, it's the 70s in New York. But she talks about how when black men come in and want to smell the perfume, she sprays it on their hand and they smell their own hand or something like that. But when a white man comes in and wants to smell it, he just takes her hand and holds it up to her face. And the way she describes it is, I don't know the right word for it.
Gross.
Gross. Well, very yes, obviously gross, but very visceral and gross because it's so visceral and violating. And obviously, it's this obvious exploration of
that exploration of how they take her agency away from her, and even in like a fairly small way in that moment. Yeah.
It's almost essentially like, it's funny because that's almost essentially like that. You could show that scene is like microaggressions. That's, maybe it's a little bigger than microaggressions, but you know what I mean? Like if somebody doesn't understand what weird racial microaggressions are, that scene can explain, you know what I mean? You could just show that 2-minute long scene. But yeah, the obvious feeling of ownership over her, and just disregard for her agency and that sort of thing from the white customers that come in, and on top of that, because I think there's also an exploration there of, because she mentions I'm sure they thought it was very progressive hiring a black girl to work the counter. There's also this fetish. I cannot say this word.
Neither can
fetishization. There's so many fetishes in there that it becomes impossible. Fetishization of people of color and that sort of thing by white people, and that scene was fascinating and horrifying in the film, but really well done. Is that particular does that come directly from the book?
Yes.
That description of those?
Almost word for word.
Yeah.
Pulled right from the book.
I had a feeling. Whew. It's an intense movie without like a whole lot happening.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some big intense scenes like the blow up, but the big fight in the beginning with Tish and Fonny's family is intense, but like obviously because it's like this big dramatic, fight and people are hitting each other and screaming and
yeah, there's some intense scenes like that, but it's not like a boom, 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 boom. Something's happening every second.
But that's like the biggest moment of that. There's also like the encounter with the policeman later. And then like the moment with Victoria and the mom later that are all upsetting. But even between that, just those are all, while those are upsetting, they're like obviously like intense and like affecting. But the moments that are much smaller than that throughout the film, just like this perfume counter scene, are also incredibly intense without anything happening. You know what I mean?
It's a very subtle kind of intense and upsetting.
Yeah.
As opposed to like everyone's at each other's throats kind of intense and upsetting.
Yeah, and I think everything about this movie kind of blew me away, but which I was expecting that to be the case, but it's so good. This was one that I thought for sure felt like it could have been a movie ad. This felt like a thing that a movie narrative would do to sort of set up the later events, so that eventually when Fonny is arrested, the cop that arrests him, we're introduced in a officer something, I can't remember his name, Officer Naharis.
Oh God. You said that and I didn't even believe you.
The police, if you have seen this movie, the police officer in this movie is played by Ed Skrein, I believe is how you pronounce his name, who played Dario Naharis, however you pronounce his name, in Game of Thrones, but he was the first one.
Yeah, the original.
For like 3 episodes.
Dario Naharis.
And then he disappeared, and then that other guy replaced him when he came back. But that first one, that is this cop. And he looks doesn't even look like. I mean, you can kind of see it in like the chin a little bit, but in general, he doesn't, because he's such a huge beefcake in it, whatever.
I want to say his name is Officer Bell.
I think you're right. I think it is Officer Bell. So Officer Bell is the one who ultimately arrests Fonny as he sees him running or doing something. They never show us that scene. We don't see that in the movie. They just talk about it, like when he gets arrested. Yeah,
we see him like briefly in the back of a cop car.
Yes, but we don't see the events that led up to that.
We don't see him get arrested.
No, so we don't know what he was doing. I think they mentioned him running. I don't know. It was a little hard to follow in that particular moment. But they set up that him and this Officer Bell Fonny and this Officer Bell had a run-in earlier in the movie where Fonny is stopping a dude from like being a creep to Tish in a grocery store and kind of like throws him out on the curb, and then the police runs over and is going to arrest him, but the grocery store clerk or owner yells at him and says, "No, they're fine. Don't arrest him. He was, And that felt to me like a potential movie ad of setting up their dynamic of like, oh, because he's like, I'll see you around or whatever. And he's like, no, maybe you won't or whatever. And him being the one that ultimately arrests him felt like maybe this scene never happened at the grocery store scene or something. Is it the same cop? Is that all play out like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. That was a long way of getting there. So it is that they have that same interaction.
We know, similar to how it happens in the movie, we know in the book that Officer Bell is the one who arrests Fonny and brings him in for allegedly raping this woman, and then we find out later on that they had this altercation outside of the grocery store. Gotcha. I think it's a vegetable stand in the book, but
gotcha. Yeah, same difference. Interesting. So throughout the course of the movie, there's Tish has voiceovers, and this is, I assumed a lot of the stuff was directly from the book, but this was the voiceovers in particular. I had a feeling just the way they were written and the way they sounded, because I like I've mentioned before in the prequel, I have heard James Baldwin speak and I've heard the way he writes, and this sounded very much like his style. Were those voiceovers like word for word pulled from the book?
As far as I can tell, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I recognized a lot of it, and if it's not exactly word for word, it's pretty dang close.
Yeah. Oh, we mentioned the perfume one in particular, which
Yeah.
is very close to what you said, almost word for word from the book. So, yeah, his style is so distinct. I feel like it's every time, like as throughout the course of the movie, whenever she would start talking, I could tell. I was like, oh yeah, for sure, that's
Yeah,
Baldwin.
he has a particular way. I say this not having actually read a lot of his work,
Right.
but disclaimer, he has a particular way with metaphor that is not at all flowery,
Yeah.
but still very beautiful and very impactful,
Yes.
but also like manages to cut you a little bit.
You know what it reminds me of, and I'm sure he's a huge inspiration for this particular scene. It would make perfect sense, but his style and the way a lot of the voiceovers and stuff and some of the dialogue but in particular her voiceovers in the movie remind me of spoken word poetry, like and that whole like beat poem scene, like
Yeah, it's got a cadence to
that
it.
cadence and again, like you said, your description of like metaphors without being flowery or overwrought,
Yeah.
but also very like they cut you, and it reminds me of listening to like really good spoken word, and it's that cadence and everything about it. And I'm sure he was probably his style and his writings I'm sure play a huge role in that. I would be amazed if he wasn't a prominent figure in sort of inspiration for that scene.
Yeah.
I would bet. I don't know. I'm not a big part of the spoken word scene, but yeah, it seems they seem too similar to me not to for spoken word not to have come from a similar place, or be directly inspired by him to some extent, or for both of them to be directly inspired by, you know what I mean? I don't know.
And the movie does, like, the book is all from Tisha's perspective.
Yeah.
So we have, like, even more of that kind of dialogue and, like, internal monologue from her in the book. And the movie makes really good use of it. We talked about voiceover in our Twilight episode.
Yeah.
But this is a good example of
Yes.
voiceover.
Yes. And you know what else? I think what else kind of lent to the spoken word beat poem type of beat poetry type of thing is that the soundtrack is playing a lot while she's doing her voiceovers, and it's a very sort of
that's a very
restrained, jazzy,
and that's a very beat poetry kind of a thing.
Yeah, very minimal, like bass and drums type of thing, kind of in the background, with a like a muted trumpet or something going. And I think that's also probably what made me feel that way. But even without that, just again, like you said, the cadence of the writing and the delivery, something about it, it's so powerful. All right, when this has got to take a little bit of time to set up. Victoria, who is the victim who accused Fonny, she ends up leaving the country and going back to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
And Tish's mom, Sharon, you said, she's going to go down there and try to talk to Victoria to convince her, like, not, or to come back and look at the picture and be like, are you sure it wasn't him? Like, we know it wasn't him. You're mistaken, and like try to talk to her and get her to come back and testify that she was wrong and that it wasn't
right. Basically, to recant her not her whole story,
right? But just that it was Fonny.
Yeah,
because she just pulls him out of a lineup that they present to her or whatever, which is a huge problem. That is a whole nother thing. I mean, it's the whole point of the story, or one of the whole points of the story. But yeah, so she goes to Puerto Rico to talk to Victoria, and when she gets there, she goes into her hotel room and she gets ready to go out for the evening. And there's this big long scene in the movie where she's getting ready and she like puts on a wig cap and then puts on a wig that is like a permed, like straight. I don't even. It's just like
kind of a permed, like shorter style than her natural hair.
And she's looking at herself in the mirror, and then she's there's a lot of complicated emotions going on. And she takes it off, and then like looks at her natural hair, and she ends up wearing the wig.
Yeah, when we see her in the car, she's wearing the wig.
She is wearing the wig to this meeting with I can't remember his name. The guy from Game of Thrones.
With the Mandalorian.
Yeah, and the Mandalorian. Yeah, what is his Prince? I keep wanting to call him Caspian.
Or something
Oberyn
like
Martell.
that. Yeah.
From Game of Thrones, and also yes, he is the Mandalorian. She's going to meet with him because he's the brother, I think, of.
So I was surprised that you didn't ask about this.
I was gonna ask him maybe her husband or brother. I couldn't tell.
Because in the book, they're like lovers, kind of, or like that's the story anyway. But he's like a nightclub owner.
Yeah, he owns his club she goes to.
Yeah.
Okay, because I read it maybe as like because she goes to America to marry some rich white guy, right? Yeah. In the movie, and that's only briefly touched upon. And then, so I assumed that he was either her brother, because in the credits they have the same last name.
Yeah.
So either her brother or relative of some sort, or her like husband from there, who maybe she left to go get, maybe he was like her husband when they were there, but they needed money. Or they don't go into any of the backstory really. There's a little bit at the beginning, briefly explaining like her going to America, but it's not a lot of information. Regardless, she goes to meet with him so that she can try to talk him into getting her a meeting with Victoria so she can talk to Victoria about this. And she's wearing this wig. The wig scene. What is that in the book? What do you think it's about? I mean, I have my theories potentially, but I don't know. I don't know if it's expanded on in the book at all, if it is in the book.
So there's a similar scene in the book, but instead of a wig, she changes different articles of clothing a few times as she's getting ready. Like she puts her hat on and takes her hat back off and puts it back on, and then she like puts a shawl on and then like puts it up over her head and then takes it down off of her head and then takes the shawl off completely. Yeah. So it's kind of similar.
A similar idea.
And in the book, I read it as like an anxiety thing, and I think that comes through in the movie as well. I think the movie's version is very powerful and timely. Yeah. I can't speak to being a Black woman and having like that the issues that like your natural hair versus
dealing with the social pressures
to have your hair look a certain type of way.
Yes.
I can't speak to that.
No, not at all. But that was what I got from that scene, was that she was dealing with that in a way because, one, she's already anxious because she's in another country that she doesn't know.
And she's about to do something very difficult, possibly dangerous.
But also a ton is writing on it. Like it's not only is it difficult and potentially dangerous, it's incredibly the stakes could not be higher. So she's got all this anxiety, and so she's trying to present herself in the way that she thinks will put her best foot forward, so to speak. You know what I mean? And so that's what I got from the scene, was that she brought this wig so that because society tells her she feels like her hair should look a certain way and it doesn't, or her natural hair is not, straight and wavy or whatever that this wig is. And so she's dealing with that sort of inner conflict of trying to decide and just the anxiety and all that.
Yeah,
and it's incredible.
And trying to figure out, like, how am I going to be best perceived here? Is it better if I wear the wig, or is it better if I wear my natural hair? I don't know. Yeah.
You can't Google, like, what are the I'm visiting Puerto Rico. What are their feelings on natural hair? You know what I mean? Like, you could Google that now. You could literally Google like what the sort of like societal like. Yeah. If you go to a certain country and it's like, oh, you're a woman, don't wear certain thing, or or cover your hair or whatever. Like, you can Google that now. You couldn't Google that in the 70s, so you just might not know. And on top of that, I think it's just a very, like you said, it's just a very powerful, timely scene of just, there's so much going on, and then it's just this extra layer of bullshit she has to, she shouldn't have to consider and agonize over whether or not to wear a wig, and if that's going to make a difference in whether or not she can maybe potentially help keep her future son-in-law out of prison. Yeah. It's this extra layer of bullshit she has to deal with in that moment, in an already just incredible, insane, high stakes, anxiety inducing moment that really comes through in the movie, in that scene. And yeah, it's okay. So that is a slight tweak from the book, but a potentially very good tweak.
I think it's a good tweak.
Cool. Only a couple more here. The scene where Tish's mom confronts Victoria. She does eventually, after she talks to Oberyn Martell, he gives her, he says, okay, I'll let you meet with her. And the next morning she meets with Victoria and they're talking. And this scene is, heartbreaking in every possible way. And it's this weird, awful intersection of traumas that is just like terrible.
Yeah.
And awful. And just everything about it is terrible, but it's also really, really good. Is that a scene in the book? I assume it is, but
yes, and it is also very close to being exactly as it appears in the book.
Yeah, because it's just this
it is
brutal.
It's this horrible, brutal intersection, like you said, of trauma.
Yeah,
where like
she's a rape victim.
Yeah,
and dealing with that,
and just wants it to be over. And she was pressured into pulling, not probably, for sure pressured into pulling somebody out of a lineup, maybe even specifically nudged and very likely nudged towards Fonny because this cop had a grudge against him or whatever. Yeah. And so, but also if she goes back on her word, that opens up that wound all over again and makes this whole thing. It's just a nightmare, but then also, and the whole time, Tish's mom gets all of that. Like, she's not naive to that. Yeah.
She understands and is, but at the same time, she's like, yeah, I get it. But also, it's this intersection of like the racial injustice with sexual injustice. And like, it's big cacophony of awful terribleness that blows up in the way it probably all would. Like, it makes, like, she just breaks, like, Victoria just kind of like breaks down. Just like has like an anxiety panic attack or something and just like starts screaming. And then the scene ends. And it's terrible, but
it really, I'm going to attempt to speak to this as eloquently and knowledgeably as I can.
Okay.
Here we go.
Do your best.
It's this really brutal, horrible, but also very, I'm going to say good, but I mean more like accurate and necessary depiction of how the justice system fails everyone.
Yes.
Just across the board. The only person who wins here is the fucking white cop.
Yeah.
He's the only one who gets what he wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Victoria's not getting any justice.
No.
She was raped. And the guy who's going to jail for it is not the perpetrator. No. That guy's still out there somewhere.
Yep. Yeah. And it's one of those tough topics too, because it is one of those things that's an intersection even currently in like intersectional feminism and stuff that is a topic that becomes tough because obviously with the current Me Too movement and that sort of thing, I say current, but the place we're at in finally at least somewhat taking victims of sexual assault and trauma seriously, and the hashtag Believe All Women type of thing, which was a clumsily worded hashtag.
Yeah. Right, because we still do have to consider the historical trend of black men being falsely accused of rape.
The intersection of what I was talking about there, where it's that was a thing that was used for hundreds of years.
Still is.
I don't want to say, but it was definitely a huge problem for a long time, and yes, definitely still is. But false allegations against particularly black men in America it was rampant, and then that butting up against the very real the reality that so much sexual assault goes completely unreported / uninvestigated on anything, and it is it's a very hard intersection, and I think that scene
this whole story, I think, it's a brilliant, brutal, painful depiction of that intersection.
Yes. Yeah. That scene is like the epitome of it, but yes, that the whole movie does that very well, and it's Ugh. Final question. We get to the end of the movie and we find out it's revealed that Fonny did not get out of jail. He's in jail. He took a plea deal because Victoria wouldn't testify or recant or whatever. And Tish and Alonzo Jr. come to visit Fonny, and they're hanging out and they're having snacks or whatever. And Fonny's gonna eat like a honey bun or whatever it is. And the little kid goes, "We got to say grace first." And they say grace. And I want to talk about the scene more later, but they say grace, and then basically the movie ends. Is that scene in the book?
No, it's not.
The whole scene at all, or just the grace?
Not
scene?
any of it.
Interesting. That particular scene, I'll just talk about it now.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned earlier sort of the tension with religion that this movie has. And that scene in particular, I really cemented for me that this story was way more antagonistic towards religion than I was expecting. The way I read that scene, and I think you could read that scene lots of different ways, but they get to the end of the story. I think there's lots of times throughout where religion is depicted as this thing that, like, Fonny's mom is like super religious, and to some extent, as far as we can tell, Tish and her family are religious, just not incredibly like they're not like holy rollers as they call it. But that scene in particular, when the little kid says his son, their kid says grace, Fonny and Tish, as he's saying it and afterwards, he's like thanking God for all of the blessings in their life or whatever. And they share this look, and the reaction Fonny has where he like crosses his arm and afterwards, to me, reads so distinctly as the how to describe this, that he in that moment, it's very pivotal that it's sort of the religion of this little how to say this. To me, that scene comes across depicting religion as the naive hope of like a child, of like,
I could agree with that.
That like this idea of, oh, God's looking out for us. Oh, thanks for our blessings. Meanwhile, his dad's in jail. Like, meanwhile, Fonny's sitting there. His reaction to me reads, wait until you get out into the world again. Like, type of thing of like, you know, to me, that scene reads that only a little kid living in America in this time and experiencing the things that like Fonny and Tish have gone through, only a little kid could still have this like steadfast faith. To me, it reads very like, again, it paints religion in a very naive sort of childish, as a very naive childish belief. I'm not saying I necessarily buy that or believe that. I mean, I kind of do to some extent. We're not going to get into my atheism here. That's a whole nother thing. But the point is that to me, that scene reads very comes across very negative on religion. I don't know if you got that from it. That was my reading on it. And again, something about Fonny and Tish's, the way they look at each other and their reaction is, I can't find the words to describe the look they share.
It's a charged look.
It's this charged look of like, I can't find the words to describe it. I'm having such a hard time. I should have written something down because I'm trying to come up with it on the fly, and I can't do a good job of accurately describing what I'm trying to say. It's driving me crazy. But yeah, I that scene in particular, I was like, whoa, okay. I wasn't expecting this movie to like, because to me that scene is this movie just like kicking religion to the curb. I'm sure other people could read it other ways. I could absolutely see people watching that scene and reading it as this very cute, like hopeful, like, oh, but they still have faith together thing or whatever. That's not how I read it, but I could see people reading it that way.
Well, and I think the book too is also very critical of religion, maybe even more so than the movie.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
And we know if you listen to the prequel.
Yeah.
James Baldwin.
Not a religious
Not a religious guy.
No. All right, that was it for Was That in the Book? We do not have Lost in Adaptation. Let's go ahead and find out what was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All right, I've got a couple things here. So one of the first things I noticed the movie skipping over or cutting out was Tish telling her mom that she's pregnant, which that's fine. Like, I understand the movie wanting to cut one of multiple reveals of her pregnancy, but it was a moment in the book that I really liked where Tish is like kind of teetering on the edge of saying it, and she looks at her mom and her mom just knows. And it's a really powerful that's mother-daughter moment.
Am I crazy that that's in the movie?
I feel like it like cut and then they were just talking about it.
I guess we don't see that exact moment, but
yeah.
Okay, I read it as she's getting ready to tell her, and then her mom already realizes, and then it just cuts to them talking about it.
That was not how I read it.
Okay. We also had issues with Hulu while we were watching this, where Hulu was putting weird edits.
Yeah, Hulu can get fucked.
Hulu's player is terrible. We have so many issues with it. But it was putting weird like cuts and edits in places.
It was like
So, anyways,
I think where maybe there were
supposed to be commercials, but there weren't commercials, and so it was causing issues. But regardless, I felt like it was mostly there. But
at any rate, It was a moment in the book that I really liked that I didn't feel. Maybe it just didn't translate the same for me in the movie. Again, I understand the movie's decision to cut things. That's often the case when you're adapting a book into a film. I do think that maybe it wasn't wholly necessary to include these, but I did at least miss some of the scenes where they're kids together. There's a scene in particular where they go to church with Fonny's mom, and it was very indicative of James Baldwin's feelings about religion.
Yeah.
It was a great scene. Like I said, I don't know that we necessarily, quote, need it narratively, but it was a good scene. There was also a character that I liked that got cut out of the Puerto Rico part of the story. There's a boy named Jamie. I say boy, he's like 18 or something in the book, who basically like drives Sharon around Puerto Rico and ends up getting like really attached to her. And that reaches like a certain point with that story there where like she's still there, but she can't like go out and try to talk to people because everybody knows what she's trying to do and they just won't talk to her. So like he goes out for her and like is her eyes and ears on the ground in Puerto Rico, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. And again, like I understand the decision to streamline that.
I think he's mentioned in the movie. I think he says like, but I don't even know if we see him, but because there is a mention of somebody taking her to Victoria.
Yeah, they make it Oberyn Martell's character who takes it there.
I don't think so.
Yes, I think it did. Also, I said Jamie, and I meant not to do that. I'm sure it's pronounced Jaime.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
But I'm seeing the J, and my brain is just rolling.
I was gonna say, I think it's probably Jaime.
It's probably Jaime. Yeah, I'm sure it is. It's Puerto Rico. I'm sure it's Jaime. The book spends a scene with Fonny in his jail cell, which is brutal and incredibly difficult to read, but I thought important. And we only get like a brief little tiny bit of that in the movie.
Yeah, there's like one shot.
Like they show him
in like a montage almost.
Fonny's dad commits suicide in the book. Not that this story needs more tragedy.
No.
But I did think it was a kind of a poignant way to show that not everybody is able to just push forward through these experiences. And I do think that without that part of the story that maybe the whole story overall dances a little teeny bit close to like the strong black person trope.
Yeah, I can see that. Potentially, yeah.
So I'm just going to put that out there. Make of that whatever you will.
Yeah. That's the thing that happens in the book that the movie doesn't do.
Another thing that was in the book. So the book introduces the fact that Victoria reported only that she was raped by a black man. And then Fonny was magically the only black man in the lineup. So we have this hope at one point in the book that maybe they can get the whole case thrown out. But then Victoria goes missing and everything gets buried in legal red tape again. And that happens very shortly before the end of the book. And I thought it was kind of an interesting, like, ooh, I'm going to give you hope, and then I'm going to pull the rug back out from under you moment.
That I don't know if that's mentioned in the movie, but I didn't come across that he was the
I
only
don't
black
recall that being mentioned.
guy in the lineup. I mean, maybe there's a lot of talk at different times about
There's a lot of like backstory that we get fairly quickly
Yeah.
in the movie.
Yeah.
I think you could probably benefit from a second viewing.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would help a lot, and and also I think, and we talked about this a little bit during the show. I had issue. I think the sound mix. It's RTV. I have issues with it sometimes, but I had some dialogue at different times. I had issues understanding because the timbre of the voice mixed with the music and stuff. It was like blending a little bit.
Yeah, there are a lot of characters with very
deeper voices, and even not that. Even without that, they're talking quickly at times, and I had some trouble with the sound mix, understanding some of the lines here and there. So I think I might have missed a couple things, but
yeah, but I don't recall that was
because that's a very specific,
movie.
like a very makes it even more obviously,
Like a setup.
Yeah, and a more obvious setup against Fonny if she's like, oh, it's a black guy, and he's the only black guy in the lineup. I'm like, oh, okay, well. Who else is she gonna pick? Like, yeah. All right, that was it for Better in the Book. Let's go ahead and talk about what was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
So the book starts off with Tish visiting Fonny in jail. I thought the movie made a good decision to place that very short scene with them, like, walking together ahead of revealing that he's in prison. I thought it was a good way to, like, set them up, make us care about them, and then drop the other shoe.
Yeah.
Ernestine, Tish's sister, has a line after the big blow-up argument between their families that was not in the book, but that I loved. Fonny's mother says something like, "My daughters won't bring home bastards," to which Ernestine fires back, "That's because nobody wants to fuck them."
Yeah.
Which is a great line. And, like, not only is that a great line, but it also totally fit. Like, I had to go back and make sure she didn't say that in the book, because I was like, I don't know, that totally would track. I feel like she could have said that in the book, but I checked. It's not in the book. Also, we talked briefly about the scene where Fonny gives Tish's mother a sculpture as a way of, and like, the movie uses that as having Tish talk about, like, the moment she realized that Fonny loved her. Yeah. Which I thought that was a really nice scene.
Yeah, it was really sweet.
Really sweet, and it was really beautifully lit and shot.
Everything in this movie is beautifully lit and shot. It's freaking gorgeous. Just
constantly. And the book does mention at one point a sculpture that Fonny gave to Sharon, but I thought, like, giving it a purposeful, like, its own scene and its own kind of purpose within the narrative in the movie was a good choice. Fonny's little basement apartment, his pad, as he calls it, I thought was more interesting in the movie. It was kind of like artisty looking. In the movie, he had like the boards over the bathtub to make like a makeshift.
I didn't realize that until
space.
the end of the movie when she's sitting next to the bathtub, and I was like, I thought a table was there, and then I saw the board sitting up against the wall. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
But I thought, yeah, it looked like kind of like a cool, like a little artist.
Yeah.
An artist's hovel.
Very much like a New York artist studio type of
Whereas
thing.
in the book, it was described as like way more like spare and kind of bleak sounding.
I mean, it's pretty bleak and spare in the movie, but it has personality.
Yeah. All right. Now, I am not usually squeamish about sex scenes. But I think in this instance, the scene where Fonny and Tish have sex the first time, way better watching it than reading it.
Yeah.
The book had some descriptions of bodily fluids that I like truly could have gone all my life without reading. I'm not usually squeamish about this kind of thing, but it was just a lot for me.
Yeah.
So if you are going to read the book, just keep in mind that that's lurking and waiting for you.
There you go.
All right, next point. So when they are about to have sex, there is a moment where Fonny like puts a blanket around her.
Yeah.
In the movie, he does that and then he goes and puts on a record and dims the lights.
Yeah.
I thought that was a preferable romantic change to, in the book, he does that and then he goes to the bathroom. Which, I mean, is also a necessary thing to do before sex.
It's also very realistic.
It's very realistic. But I thought the movie brought a romantic aesthetic quality to the scene.
Yeah, I mean, in that moment with the sort of everything that scene is doing in the film, the music, the lighting, the way it's playing out, it would be, we walked down the hall and then we heard him peeing. Like, it wouldn't quite fit in the mood, the vibe.
It would be a different kind of a scene.
Yeah, for sure.
If that happened in the movie. I loved Tish's call him Fonny speech to the lawyer in the movie.
Is that not in the book at all?
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. I also liked that we got to see one of Tish's nightmares in the movie. She has a nightmare where she's like in the subway and then it pans back and he's like shaking on the bars and screaming, "Let me out."
Yeah.
Which the book mentions that she has nightmares, but we don't ever see one.
Yeah.
I also thought it was kind of cheesy, but I thought the scene where they go to look at the loft.
Oh, with Dave Franco.
And they fake move a refrigerator into the loft.
Really cute.
It was cute.
Yeah.
It's cheesy, but it's cute.
Oh yeah. No, this movie does a great job with when it's not heartbreaking, that's why it's heartbreaking, is because it's so cute and their chemistry is so good.
Yeah.
And the scenes we get of them.
You really want those two crazy kids to make it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're adorable and you love them both. They're both very like you get enough characterization of each of them to really understand what makes them tick and also why they care about each other, and they also they're not remotely one-dimensional. Like, Fonny has his art and stuff, but he's also fiercely like protective of her, and also but Tish is also, despite her being, tends to be more demure and quiet and seemingly sort of demure, I guess is probably the best word, but she has moments in the movie where she absolutely stands up and has more of a fiery, you see like the more of her sister or like her mom in her, like even when in the moment in the beginning where Fonny's mom is like berating her, like she stands up for herself, she doesn't just take it. Like, I think the movie does an incredible job, and again, it's what makes it so heartbreaking is that their relationship is so. It is if there wasn't this heartbreaking, awful story going on around their relationship, it would just be a great like romantic film. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it would just be a beautiful like, or you could have that same like the scene with Dave Franco and the whole fake moving the refrigerator. That whole bit could have been ripped out of a rom-com. Yeah. We could have been watching these two characters in a rom-com, but we don't get to.
Yeah. But you want to. I desperately want to just watch a story about them, like, starting a life together. Right.
That's the movie 2020 needs. Enough of this not terrible sadness. We got like he gets out of it's a sequel, and it's like, oh, that moment where it ticks up right where they were hanging out in the commissary or in the meeting room, and then the little kid says grace, and then the movie ends, but then it kicks back up right there, and then Tish is like, I'm so glad you're getting out tomorrow, and they're like, yeah, and then it's just them having a great life for the next 20 years, and that's the movie. Like, yeah. I mean, that would truly be sort of an undercutting of the original message in a way of like the Rambo sequels are of the original Rambo, or Last Blood or First Blood. But yeah, it's you do want that, which is what makes it more of as effective of a film as it is.
Yes,
it's because you desperately want that.
Absolutely. I also thought this movie had a really good montage in it. There's a montage close to the end. And all of the dialogue, like her monologue over it is straight from the book. So we know that all of this stuff happens, but we don't actually see it in the book. It's just like some exposition. But the montage moves from like their lawyer interacting with the other lawyers and realizing that like
they're judging
this
him
is
for, representing a black guy.
And like learning about that systemic issue.
Yeah.
Like in the moment, and then it moves like into the family arguing about money, and then it moves into both of the dads moving stolen goods. And I thought it was a really great montage and a good addition to the verbatim lines from the book. Yeah,
that montage in particular, the moment, it's very 70s, that moment where they're smuggling the clothes or whatever, and that's the shot I mentioned earlier where the dad's dressed super cool, but he turns and like looks with like his cool like fedora and stuff, and the camera like zooms in, and it feels like something out of a heist movie.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like this weird like heist movie thing, like moment dropped in the middle of this. It's like a ton of fun. All right, let's go ahead and talk about what the movie nailed, which is like everything.
It was basically everything, yeah.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
We already talked about a lot of the stuff that the movie nailed. I'm just gonna give a couple more things that we hadn't specifically touched on. One of Tish's first lines, it might be the very first thing she says in the voiceover in the movie, is, I hope that nobody ever has to look at anybody they love through glass. Yeah. Which is straight from the book.
Yeah, I almost used that for the opening quote when I was looking at quotes.
Yeah.
From the book, yeah.
Fonny stealing the tools and the wood from the vocational school to start on his artistic endeavors. That's straight from the book. The scene with her dad when he finds out that she's pregnant and he asks her if she's sure that she wants the baby, and then is reassuring her that she's not a bad girl.
Yeah.
Is out of the book. And I thought that was a really sweet scene.
Yeah, it is.
And like refreshing.
Yeah.
Because it's not the kind of scene that you expect.
No.
In that situation.
No, and especially not. It's especially that knowing that it is directly from the book, because that's for something written in 1976 or whatever it was, the 70s.
It was in the 70s, yeah.
Yeah, so it's that, that an attitude like that may be more common these days.
Yeah,
potentially a little more, but maybe less so back in the 70s. And it's a very sweet scene.
The restaurant that they go to, they call it the Spanish restaurant in the book. I don't know if that's necessarily, I have no idea if that's accurate or not.
No, I don't know.
But they call it the Spanish restaurant, and then Diego Luna's
that's where
character,
Diego Luna works.
The owner of the restaurant who always flirts with Tish.
Yeah.
So that's right out of the book. And
I meant to ask this. Does Fonny speak Spanish?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Because that moment when they first go to that restaurant and he's speaking Spanish, that moment, it's some brilliant act, it's very subtle acting, but is it Kiki Lane? Is that who plays Tish? Is that the actress's name, I believe?
Oh,
I think it is.
I think
it is. Kiki Lane is in this movie. I'm pretty sure she plays Tish, but I remember because I read all the actors' names and I can't remember. But Tish, in that moment when he starts speaking Spanish to Diego Luna, the look on her face, she was already in love with him, but she just like melts, and it's just watch that moment when you're if you haven't watched this movie yet. Just look at her face in that moment. It's great.
The last thing that I have under the movie nailed it is his friend Daniel. His story about why he is sent to prison for stealing a car, and he doesn't even know how to drive a car.
Oh, yeah.
Is exactly out of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, that guy did a good job, too. That's Brian Tyree Henry, I believe is the actor's name, who is I most knew from... he's been in lots of stuff now,
Atlanta.
But Atlanta was the thing that I first saw him in, but he's been in other stuff since then because he kind of blew up in Atlanta. But yeah, he's really good in that scene. Mm-hmm. All of their scenes together are really good. But their whole discussion of jail and stuff or prison is... Whew. All right, we got a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. The score, we both have this note, is...
The score of this movie destroyed me.
So good. I don't think it was nominated for anything, and it blown away because it's so just haunting and amazing. And that the one, it's the first song in the movie when they're walking together.
Yeah.
And that was the same one that was in the trailer, and it like immediately gripped me in the trailer, and I know why they put it in the trailer because it's just it's this like incredible like haunting. It's like dreamy and like it's that repeating. It's like a repeating trumpet over like horns or something, like very low, quiet horns. And it just kind of swells, and it's this repeating trumpet, like it just keeps going, you know, and it just keeps doing that over and over again. And it's like a muted trumpet, and it's just so. It evokes this dreamlike, and it works great in that scene because it is like this is the before anything is wrong that we know of. It's just this young couple,
the dream world.
Yes, floating through this beautiful, warm summer day, or or fall day. And it's but the whole score throughout the whole film, but that theme is so good.
Yeah.
And so just
it was my first note that I wrote down, like the first couple of notes of that score, and I was like, oh, I can already tell this is gonna destroy me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nuts. And the cinematography, we mentioned it a few times, but it's so good. The guys, I can't remember the guy's name. I saw it was Jason Baxter or something like that. He also shot Moonlight, and he's worked on tons of stuff now, but he works with Barry Jenkins a lot, and they chose a very distinct and specific color palette for everything. Everything's really warm. It's like yellows and oranges and reds and greens, but like a warm green, if that makes sense. It's like a yellowy green. And it's just the one shot in particular that stuck out. I have a note about it too, and you posted a picture of it, but that shot where they're walking down the street in the rain after they leave the Spanish restaurant with the red umbrella is just stunning. Like you could just take that, print it out huge and put it on your wall. You could do that with a lot of shots in this movie, but there's so many just really cool. There's that cool moment where he's sculpting and smoking and the camera's spinning around the sculpture, and it's the smoke's hanging in the light.
And they made such cool use of smoke throughout the film too.
They really did. Yeah, and which makes sense because at a time where everybody was smoking, but they took it and they really integrated it into the visual style. Yeah,
I guess that's also something that the movie nails because they're just constantly smoking throughout the book too.
It's the 70s. Yeah, everybody was smoking all the way up until like the 90s or whatever. Everybody smoked all the time. Or maybe the 80s, I think.
And like really on that note too, something that I thought was funny that I didn't think to mention before, when she tells her family that she's pregnant and they like break out the brandy. Yeah. And her mom says like, oh, just a small one for Tish. Yeah. Or something like that. That was very much a modern update. Oh, because she drinks and smokes throughout her entire pregnancy in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, they it's just so good there. And one of the moments that really struck me too, the way there's a couple, every time they showed them holding hands, the way the camera revealed it was just so beautiful. And like there's that one in particular where they're walking down the street. They do a lot of walking down the middle of streets. So I was like,
yeah,
I guess that's probably a choice in terms of like there's this young carefree just walking down the middle of the street type of thing. But and then there's the one shot too in particular that reveals Fonny's face a little bit when he gives Tish's mom the wood thing. There's a shot from over Tish's mom's shoulder, and like she's holding the wood thing and she moves it and it like comes down, and the way it reveals his just everything about the movie, I want to watch it again just to look at it again because it's just so beautiful. I thought it was really like they did a very good job. Stephen James or Stefan James, I could not find how to pronounce it because it's spelled Stephan, which I feel like could read either way.
Yeah, that could go either way.
So I think it's probably Stephen, but I don't know. I guess I could have looked up an interview. I was trying to like Google like pronunciation guy. I couldn't. I should have just looked up an interview where somebody says his name. An idiot, but but all the casting in this is great. Everybody's incredible. But they must have really went out of their way to find somebody with like the saddest eyes.
Yeah.
He has his eyes have this immense sadness in them just naturally, I feel like, and it works really well for this movie. But I mean, they're not always just sad, but like he has this look to him that he does world weary and beaten very well.
Maybe the casting call specified sad eyes.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows? But
so I want to talk about the ending.
Yeah.
End of the movie versus the end of the book. Now, the end of the movie, you can definitely read hopeful.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
We don't know when he's going to get out, but the assumption is she takes a plea deal from what they say. He's been in for at least 5 years. We're to assume maybe, a little while longer.
Yeah, so at the end of the movie, we see Tish deliver the baby. She has like a home birth in Fonny's little apartment.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And like you said, Fonny, he ends up having to take a plea deal, so he's in prison. But like we see the family interacting. Yeah. They allude to him getting out at some point.
We don't know how long. Could be 5 years, could be 20 years. But.
So now, and I think you can, like we talked about earlier, you can read certain aspects of it bleak.
Yeah.
But you can also read it hopeful.
Yeah.
The book ends, so the family finds out that Frank committed suicide.
And that's
Fonny's dad. Yeah. And then the last few lines of the book right after that imply that Tish has started going into labor.
Okay.
And I'm going to read a very small excerpt. I opened my mouth to say, I don't know what. When I opened my mouth, I couldn't catch my breath. Everything disappeared except my mother's eyes. An incredible intelligence charged the air between us. Then, all I could see was Fonny. And then I screamed, and my time had come. Fonny is working on the wood, on the stone, whistling, smiling. And from far away, but coming nearer, the baby cries and 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 cries like it means to wake the dead. The end.
Yeah. Yes. That's... Yeah.
I don't know how you read that one as hopeful.
No, definitely not.
It's pretty bleak.
It's pretty bleak.
So basically in the book, we never find out what happens with Fonny. Yeah. We don't know. Does he take a plea deal? Do they manage to get him out? There's a little bit at the end where they're trying to like kind of scrape up bail money because they think maybe they can get him out on bail since Victoria has disappeared and they don't know when the trial is going to happen. Yeah. So we're like, well, do they manage to get him out? Does he end up having to go to trial? What happens with that? Does he have to take a deal? We don't know.
Yeah.
And I didn't really feel comfortable putting this particular change into either section because I think we need both of these endings on different occasions. the book is stark and heartbreaking and the movie is hopeful, I think you could argue that maybe the book is more realistic.
I mean, yeah, I don't think the movie's unrealistic in its ending. The movie's still heartbreaking, and the movie leaves us with that unsure, we don't know. That's might true. Be in there for the rest of his life.
Yeah, we don't know.
You know what I mean? I mean, we get that there's at least he gets to see his kid and they get to, he gets to hug him and that sort of thing. But like, we don't know. So there is a bleakness to it, but it is definitely a slight. There's a tinge. There's a silver lining of hope on this just awful.
Not as bleak as the book.
Yeah.
But I do think we need both of those endings in turn.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So
I agree. My last note was burn the system down. Burn it down. Burn it all down. Justice system's fucked. It's all terrible. Burn it down.
Yep.
Burn it down. I mean, that was my opinion before this movie, so it's not like the movie. But yeah, it's yeah. Oof. It's
such an incredibly timely.
Yeah. Oh
story.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and it was 2018, and it even now. I mean, it's even more timely now. It feels like it was incredible. Well, it'll always be timely.
Yeah, but then that's the thing too. Isn't that just fucking sad and tragic that this was a timely story when it was written in the 70s, and here we are in 2020, and it's still just as timely.
Just as timely, yeah. Yeah, yeah. You can hopefully one day it won't be timely.
Yeah. You
can hope, but it got a lot of work to do for that to be the case. All right, it's time. Final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
So we say this a lot, but this is definitely another instance of both the book and the movie being well worth your time. And aside from the big change at the end that we just discussed and a few sensible cuts, this is a very faithful adaptation. But I think for me, this time, it's going to be the movie. Having the stunning visuals and the heart-wrenching score and the brilliant acting, I think elevated an already good story to a new place without changing what it is at its core. And again, the book, well worth your time. Beautifully written and short, only around 200 pages. I read most of it in a day.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily recommend doing that because it's not an easy read.
Yeah.
But it is beautiful and brutal.
All right. The movie takes this one slightly. But check out both. Where were you? Is it free? Is it or did you purchase? Or?
No, I was able to
the book
rent. I was able to rent the ebook. There is an ebook version, and I was able to rent it. I used the app Libby.
Gotcha.
To get books from my local library to get ebooks. So I was able to rent it through that. You could also buy the ebook anywhere you buy ebooks.
Yep. There you go. All right. I assume it's also in publication somewhere too.
Yeah.
You just didn't. Yeah. You just wanted the ebook. Okay. Cool. That's it for this episode. Before we go, we've got a few things to do. One, most important, if you could do us a huge favor, you can just go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating and review if you enjoy our podcast. That's great. You can also support us on Patreon if you want, but you don't have to. That's fine too. Donate to a charity instead. That's fine. And also, what was the other thing I was going to say? There was something else. I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Katie, what's next?
Up next, our summer series continues with New Moon.
Going back to Twilight.
Back to Forks.
Slightly different mood.
Only slightly.
Yeah. Yes. I'm already like 150 pages into this one. I've been reading it.
How is New Moon treating you so far?
It's just now starting to get a little better. I was optimistic because I knew that Edward wasn't in a lot of this one, but it's not any better so far because she just talks about him constantly. So it's like he's there even when he's not, and it's not really a whole lot better in that regard. But things are starting to move. We're 150 pages in. Things are starting to the plot's maybe starting to get going. I don't know. It's been okay. It's been fine.
Oh, my sweet summer child.
It's been fine. I'm just waiting for some things to start going. I know that's the point, to some extent, of the books, is to sort of revel in that, in the young heartbreak and all that sort of stuff. I get it. It's just for me,
it's 2006 and we're reveling in our angst.
For me, the angst is a little tedious, but I get it. So we're chugging through. We're chugging on. That's going to do it for this episode. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.